question here is that beside monetary compensation, how can a tech startup with limited resources attract the best people to work for the company? I think that comes from Enping.
So I think obviously we all know, right? Typically, if we haven't gone to the funding route itself, typically we are backed by either DBS, UOB, or OCBC, right? Our own bank account, basically, right? So what happens is that we have spent very prudently, we are bootstrapping, and hence we can't pay the highest salary. I mean, even if you want to, you probably can't last beyond 6 months, basically.
True.
So what's important is that from a HR point of view, right? Well, I'm not a compensation specialist, right? But what I can tell you is that what's important is to look at total rewards. Let me explain a bit further. Total rewards have multiple components. First and foremost, your basic salary, right? So talk about what you draw back, what you draw monthly, which is the most standard, the most basic, right? Is it like a 3K, 5K, whatever it is? Next is then the benefits element. Typically, startups don't really have much benefits, which I understand. It's probably maybe a little bit of annual leave, which is basic. Some may even just go to the bare MOM minimum of 7 days. So benefits is something to think about. How can I play benefits? Obviously, it's cost to you, but the cost is less upfront in some sense. You're not using really cash flow in that sense, right? So hence, that's something you can play with to up the total rewards game in some sense. So when it comes to total rewards from the benefits point of view, right? What's important to think about this? It's perceived value rather than actual value. So understanding what your employees value. So for example, if I have a lot of young employees, probably they won't care so much about insurance. I'm pretty sure about that because back then when I was younger as well, nobody cared about insurance. Even my employees now don't ask about insurance. But to younger employees, they care a lot about flexibility. That's one. So working from home policy could be quite important, which is of course what we have now. Second part is then you talk about annual leave entitlement, or even off in lieu, right? So if you're unable to pay them more, could you have compensated with maybe 1 day off, for example, or maybe beef up the leave a little bit? This is something to think about. Obviously, in total, it still costs, but like I said, it's not cash flow. So it can help you sustain a bit longer. It helps. So perceived value from benefits point of view is very important. So that's the second component to it. The third part is then we talk about the, what you call it? So we talk about actual, let's say the first one is salary, talk about benefits. Then you also talk about the additional perks when it comes to non-tangible benefits. For example, right, things that are not within the policy itself. For instance, how do you treat them? Do you treat them like family more than employees? That's one. Do you give them like flexibility, like I said, which is maybe not within the policy itself, but as and when maybe they have family issues, they need to take some time off, they want to work from home, let them do it and just measure based on outcome rather than airtime or FaceTime, for example. All these are important to think about. So the tangible from a salary point of view to benefits to intangible, where it can be flexibility, it can be the messaging that you send. All these are part of total rewards that we want to consider. And it's a messaging that you send to them more than the actual value at times. So these are some things you want to think about from a startup point of view. And obviously, from a tangible point of view, some also throw in equity, right? Minimum equity to ensure that, you are actually also a business owner. You own part of the company and then you want to motivate them to do more. So you want to think about that as well, because that's something that may or may not work. Let me just put it that way, because some employees, for them is that I just want stability. I just want my fixed salary. To me, I don't give a damn about owning a company, right? And you can tell me so much, but I just want to do my job and get paid. Obviously, you will say that I don't want to hire people like that, but sometimes at the very beginning, for startups in particular, our choices are limited. What you want is someone that can play the game in a team, basically. So hence, this is something to think about. And the equity part may or may not work for every single one. And obviously, when you give equity, you're selling hope. And that hope can only last for so long, right? So if employees don't see any returns, any change, they will actually feel frustrated with that. So hence, you need to think of it, from a horizon point of view, from a total rewards point of view, and from a messaging point of view. These are things to think about from a compensation angle.
Have in takeaway is how to identify talents who are not solely motivated by money and have a shared vision. It sounds like a happier task for this, right?
Of course. Okay, so it goes back to employer branding for a start.
Okay.
So I think most people don't, especially startups, they don't think about employer branding. They think of hiring as just putting on JobDB, I get a headhunter, I just hire from there. Actually, it starts from internally your culture and then your employer brand. Let me explain a bit further, right? When you have a good culture internally, I think it makes it a lot more sound when you try to sell your organization, sell your story externally. So first and foremost, think of internally, what are my strengths? What kind of value proposition can I offer to people outside internally? what resonates with my employees. And that kind of forms what we call the employee value proposition, EVP in short, that you can use to articulate externally and internally, right? So once, I mean, just to simplify it for a start, once you have the EVP, right, externally from an employee branding point of view is then, how can I not just sell a role? I'm actually selling my story. I'm selling an alignment. I'm selling a vision, basically, right? So that's why I try to sell outside and not just place a role, 3 years experience, can do this, can do that, and stuff like that.
Yep.
But what is your story? What is your message that you want people to resonate with? And what is the people you're trying to hire based on that story? Once your story is clear, right, you will then be able to attract the right people. Because if it is just a generic JD, for instance, or generic description about your company, chances are you attract generic people, right? People who are just there to try their luck, people who just need a job, and chances are they're not going to fit.
Yep.
Because they can probably tick some boxes, but they don't fit your culture at all. Hence, the employee branding part that I was talking about is really about your story, your vision, and being very clear and deliberate about that. And of course, like I said, when deliberate, it has to be authentic, meaning understanding what's happening internally first, aligning so that you minimize the discrepancy when people actually try to look for this role. Because the last thing you want is that I oversell. When they come for interview, I sell this and that. When they come in, the actual reality is here. And that's where the frustration happens, and that's where turnover happens typically.
So it's always better to under-promise and over-deliver.
Or promise what you can deliver. I think that's essentially.
I see. So it's essentially to the point, to promise the exact role, what you can deliver at the end of the day.
And then I wouldn't say under-promise, but promise what you can deliver, and over-deliver in a sense where you create better experiences from that and build over time. I think that's what's important.
I understand. It's quite interesting because in the past, you hear a lot of people who stays beyond 5 years.
Yep.
But growing trend itself, it sounds like, the question is more from the point of view that the life cycle, has changed from, and the talented, employees no longer stay more than a year in most companies itself. I think the question on this front is really or not, what kind of engagement, what kind of things can you do to retain them? Or is it okay to just let them go?
Okay, I'll answer in two parts, right? The first part is then, I'd like to throw a question to our audience over here. First and foremost, what's important to you? Is it retaining that so-called talent? Or is it more important to retain the value that they create? I think that's something I want all of you to think about, right? Because in a lot of organizations that we see, yes, you have people who are there for 20, 30 years, but sometimes these are people that you want to exit, but you have problem exiting.
That's true.
Right? And, building on the question itself, think about this as well, right? A follow-up question. Would you rather have someone, A+ player or team member that come in within 1 year to build up, something really amazing, scale up for you, and then leave it in a better hands for the next person to take over? Or would you rather have a C player who stays for 5 years, but constantly you need to, manage, and you need to kind of find issues with them, you need to have the conversation? Which would you prefer? So really goes back to the question, right? Are we retaining talent or are we retaining value? That's the first thing to think about. Obviously, we want to retain good talent who has high value perpetually, but we all know, even for MNCs, not only startups, it's not always possible, and it's highly likely not so possible, right? So that's the first thing I want to think about. And let's move on to the next part, which is your question: how do we go about retaining? How do we create culture? I think it goes back to, are you able to really align, what the individual is looking for with what you're able to offer? As simple as that. I mean, when it comes to employment, right, beyond that sense of purpose and stuff like that, to some extent it's a transaction, right? People leave because they're unhappy about certain things that's not working out, or something outside that's pulling them because it's more attractive, that fulfills their objective a lot more, whether it's faster or in a more concrete manner, for example. So first and foremost, once again, right, simple advice, it goes back to communication. Do you actually understand what your team member is looking for? Do you really understand? Or is it just, I'm paying them a salary, I expect to get the job done, basically, right? I think that's a common thing that's happening, which is, I think while we all laugh about this, it's common, right? So do we understand what they're really looking for? A simple framework that all of you can consider, I call it MAPS, M-A-P-S. First and foremost is that people look at M, mastery, right? They want to become better and better at what they do, whether they're tech people, non-tech people. That's the first thing. Are you providing them with opportunities to learn, whether it's formal or informal? Are you helping them to become better at their craft? That's something to think about. M, the mastery itself. Second one, A, is then autonomy, right? So autonomy meaning, right, do they feel like they have a voice in the company, or are they constantly being stifled? Are they constantly just following your instructions from top down, or do they actually have a say in certain things? Do they have certain freedom to experiment, to initiate certain things? Autonomy is quite important to people in different degree, obviously, right? Third one is then purpose, right? Is it aligned to what they believe in? Obviously, they feel like their purpose is aligned to your purpose when they join a company. That happens most of the time. But then along the way, are you constantly re-looking at this purpose? Are you constantly articulating this purpose to them so that they are reminded why did they join in the first place? So that's very important as well.
Got it.
Last one, S, sense of belonging. Do they feel like, okay, from a financial point of view, right? Do they feel like they're a number on a spreadsheet? Or do they feel like I'm really a valued member of the family? So that is something that you want to think about. MAPS, MAPS, mastery, autonomy, purpose, sense of belonging. If you are able to understand that, of course, in different degree, right? Chances are there's a higher chance you can retain them or at least motivate them to do more, basically. Yeah. So this is something for you to take away. Yeah.